I've been having a lot of discussions in the group chat recently about closeting and late in life discovery of your identity and things of that nature, and one thing that's become clear to me is that I have a lot of knowledge and perspective and things like that for the abundant amount of time that I spent in the closet, and there are a lot of things that I learned there and from the process of coming out that I think it would be beneficial to share to other people. And while a lot of these things are things that deserve a deep dive and are things that I will probably eventually do a deep dive on, I kind of want to introduce them briefly to get them in people's minds, to get a little bit of feedback and discussion going, and then I'll do a deep dive a little bit later and I'll incorporate some opinions from the comment section and things of that nature. So please let me know in the comment section if anything in this video resounds with you. I'm tentatively calling this series Closet Case, though I'm open to suggestions because I'm not 100% attached to that name at this point. Today's topics include why I wish every woman is sapphic, and it's not to increase the size of the dating pool, I promise. Coping skills for closeting, like that hobby that you were obsessed with until you came out of the closet and now you don't feel the need to do it 100% of the time anymore. For me, it was fan fiction and other fiction writing, especially collaborative fan fiction with other women. We're going to do some discussion on beard relationships, but that's definitely going to be the first deep dive of any of these topics that I do. That should be coming up within the next couple of weeks or so. And finally, queer joy. It is radical, it is needed, let's discuss it. Hi, my name is Erin Moriarty, and in addition to discussing Taylor Swift and other pop music figures, I also discuss just general things in relation to being sapphic and commentary on trending internet culture issues. With regards to Taylor Swift, I primarily do muse-free or Taylor is her own muse analysis, so if that's something that interests you or if any of this interests you, please give me a follow. I'm still a very small channel, it helps me out a ton. Coming up soon, I'm going to be doing a reaction video to a D'Angelo Wallace video that he did on YouTube comments. There are some really troubling things going on, and I have a lot of additional opinions, so I'm going to be doing that fairly soon. I also am doing a video on the song So Long London and how I believe it is an auditory simulation of a panic attack. So if that's interesting to you, please keep a lookout for it, because it's probably going to get hit by the algo pretty hard. First segment, every woman should have the distinguished pleasure of growing older as a sapphic, because when you grow older loving women, you learn a lot of things about women that society teaches you otherwise. You realize a lot of the things that society teaches you about women and what makes women attractive and things like that are all lies that are fed to you by gross men with gross proclivities. Men that like very young women are setting this standard that it's normal to like very young women. But in my personal experience, I have really been attracted to women who are close to my age and a little bit older, maybe a couple years younger, for basically the whole time that I've been aware that I was attracted to women, and realizing that as I've gotten older has made it easier for me to get older, right? Because I used to believe that I had this ticking time clock, that I had to get married at the height of my attractiveness, or I was gonna miss out, or I wasn't going to get the best spouse or something like that. I had a lot of these ideals about how I should enter in a relationship basically very, very young and stay in that relationship, because I am utilizing my attractiveness, which is a finite resource, a resource that's going to fade away. But when you actually like women and aren't just pretending to like women, you realize that a lot of the traits associated with women getting older that pervy men don't like are actually good things. I love a woman that is well-read, that has opinions, that knows what she likes. I like a woman that is not afraid to say no if she's not enjoying what's going on. I like a woman who wants to be there and who is there because it pleases her, not because she feels trapped there financially or that it's her only option or her best option for financial security and for stability and for safety. And I truly hate how much the selfie was villainized the moment it became associated with young women and girls, because at the dawn of photography and back in portrait painting and stuff like that, there were a lot of men who did art that was centered around themselves, self-portraits, whether they be painted or whether they be taken with a camera. But as soon as selfies became something that women and girls did to empower themselves, to make themselves feel better, to gain praise from others, whether it be romantic interests or whether it just be friends, it became this thing that was viewed as being narcissistic, as not being artistic, as not being valuable, and in fact being the opposite. If you do it too often, it is a symbol of your low value to a lot of people. And that hurts so many people so bad in so many ways. And it wasn't until I started getting older and started getting more comfortable photographing myself that I truly realized that, like, the female body, regardless of age, regardless of size, regardless of all of these other factors, like, the female body is a work of art, and we should be using our bodies for art. If that means that we are the subject of a selfie, if it means that it's just like a quick mirror selfie, or if we go out into the yard and we put on a really frilly costume and we pose delicately and we Photoshop it into something that looks like a Baroque painting, like, all of these things are using our bodies for art in a way that is very often, like, it can really boost your self-esteem depending on how you do it. Like, sure, there are absolutely aspects of, like, social media and selfie culture that makes people think less of themselves. But as you start to feel better about yourself, and as you start to view your body in a different way, see your body as something empowering, as something freeing, as something that allows you to express yourself, you can actually really build self-esteem. Like, I know a lot of my friends who do not meet the conventional, like, standards of what's attractive or what's viewed as attractive by society. And a lot of them have found posing for artful selfies is a way to take back control over how they feel about their bodies and their own self-image. And I love the way that women are doing that. I love the way that a lot of different people are doing that, are realizing that the selfie is a form of expression. It's a form of showing the person that you want to be perceived of to the world. But they don't want us to realize that we are art. They don't want us to realize that we are empowered. They don't want us to realize that we can and should express ourselves the way that we want to express ourselves. And like I was saying, the media tries to normalize this idea that it's normal and expected for men to want to replace the women in their lives with a younger model. And that is very, very seldom the case in WLW relationships. Like, it's very often only the case in women who really haven't disassembled the patriarchy and are just modeling patriarchal behaviors in their own life and, like, taking on a masculine, like, position in it and, you know, treating women the way bad men treat women. But the large majority of women-loving women do not feel that way. Now that I have opened up myself to who I am and what I actually like, and I'm really looking at women as they're meant to be looked at, I'm realizing that things like gray hair and wrinkles and fat rolls and things like that, those are all things that can be attractive. Like, sure, there are always contexts in which things cannot be attractive, but just because you have a gray hair or a wrinkle or a fat roll does not inherently render you unattractive. And I think that we need to go back to viewing these as somewhat neutral qualities and seeing our body in a different light, seeing our body in a less critical light. And once you've really opened up your mind to women's struggles and how society works, seeing women around you just, like, going out there and killing it despite all of the factors and the pressures against them, like, it is impossible not to look at women and be in awe so often, because so many women are expected to deliver excellence, and the more marginalized they are, the more this expectation of excellence exists. Like, women cannot just come and exist in a space. Women are expected to deliver excellence. And it's amazing watching the various ways that women do this, perform this excellence, manage to adapt to a world that doesn't necessarily really always want them there, especially me going through IT and stuff like that. A lot of times I was not wanted in those spaces, and that definitely had an impact on how I felt about myself. Being in lesbian spaces, we're going to get into this queer joy segment at the very end of this video, but being in lesbian spaces was just incredibly empowering and affirming and validating in so many ways that I didn't realize that I needed. And when I dated men, there was always this feeling that I needed to cut parts of myself off because I was a star and he needed a cog to fit the machine of his plan. And I would cut off these parts of myself, this interest in fashion, this interest in art, this interest in making videos, because I knew that they made him uncomfortable. But then when I started seeing how women, especially in lesbian relationships, were, and realizing that they can be twin stars existing in each other's orbit, but still allowing each other to shine and to thrive and to grow and feeding off of each other and, like, being that power couple and not feeling threatened by one another's joy beauty and their glory and their light. A lot of the dominant relationship culture really stresses changing yourself to get the partner you want instead of looking for the partner who will accept you the way you are and who will love you for all of those things. And I can tell you, like, regardless of who or what you are, there is somebody in the world who, like, that's their thing. No matter what you look like, no matter what you sound like, no matter what you act like, there is going to be somebody out there who accepts you for your authentic, true self. And it's very seldom worth it to cut pieces off of yourself just to be accepted by somebody who can't accept the real you. Because inevitably, when I have done that in the past, I have always spent a significant portion of those relationships wondering if that person genuinely liked me or if I had just fooled them into a relationship with me. And it has made me have like a lot of doubts in my relationships. I realized that it didn't really matter what I liked. If it wasn't something that he also liked, it was probably going to get mocked and viewed lesser of, and I was encouraged to give that up for his pursuits, the real hobbies, the good hobbies, the worthy hobbies. Even when I was with men who seemed on the surface like they really respect me, they only respected the certain parts of me that they viewed as valuable. There were always other parts of me that, like, once they got to see the real me and they're like, why do you have stuffed animals? Why do you listen to this chick music? Why do you play The Sims? It was always about breaking off these parts of me that they didn't necessarily approve of. Or they would engage with me on it, but not necessarily in the ways that I wanted. Like, I would play D&D with them and I would solve a ton of puzzles and I would, like, expect to get a little bit of attention or praise or something, notice that I solved all these puzzles, and instead he would be like, oh, those like 15 seconds you spent flirting with that barkeeper were really hot, we should totally do it. These relationships were emotionally unfulfilling and unsupportive at best, and actively harmful and abusive at worst. And it led to a lot of coping strategies. I got to discussing with a couple of other late-in-life lesbian friends of mine how a lot of us had hobbies while we were with men that we performed excessively that we stopped like the moment we came out of the closet, and mine was fanfiction writing. And I do think that I could go back and pick up fanfiction writing, but like for many years I had to write. I did a video on it. I was writing 10,000 words of fanfiction a day while I was working a full-time job, because now I realize it was escapism for how miserable I was in my relationship and in my life. Like, I needed to basically have my mind elsewhere, have my mind in a fantasy world, have myself distracted by writing in this fantasy world so I didn't think about the things that were happening in my real life. And I was also getting some of the things that I needed that I hadn't necessarily realized that I needed yet, like emotional support and things like that. A lot of these things that I, in my pick-me state, was like, I don't need female friends, I don't need emotional support, I did. I was just getting it on the back end in a way that didn't strike me as being so girly as a way of getting emotional support. Like, a lot of us had these escapist pursuits that were kind of a way of dissociating from the uncomfortable, harmful environments that we were existing in. Like, for me, living with a man especially was very difficult for me. I never felt like I was safe. I always felt like I had to put on an act. And I think creative writing as a pursuit for closeted queer people is really interesting because of the way it manifests for a lot of us. Like, there are two ways that I think people go. Either you are closeted and you get out a lot of your closeted urges through this creative writing, right? Or you're closeted and you cut off that creative part of yourself because I think on some level you know that it's going to come out. Like, one of the reasons that I realized that I did not make a novel for so many years is because I know that a lot of times if you are reading a book by a closeted queer person, you can kind of tell that they're closeted. Like, there were a lot of things that even if I didn't necessarily realize exactly how I would feel exposed, there was a part of my brain that would not give me the executive function to do a book because it realized, this ain't safe for us. We're gonna be pulled immediately out of the closet if we do this. And my writing of choice was collaborative roleplay, and that filled a ton of voids for me, right? It filled this void where I got to actually roleplay WLW relationships, and sometimes they were written by other women. I got to be the man in a partnership in a lot of these relationships. I was not only treating the characters that my characters were in a relationship with the way I wanted to be treated, but then also I would have partnerships where I played the girl and somebody else was the guy, and they were writing men the way I wished men treated me in my life. And I do think that there is a lot of undercurrent of closeted queer people in fanfiction spaces, especially fanfiction spaces like the ones that I was in, Dragon Riders of Pern and Star Trek, which queerness has always been fairly implicitly accepted there, so a lot of the fandoms are more accepting. Very seldom do you get in trouble for creating a gay character. Very seldom does anybody mind if you create a gay character. There were a lot of things that I could get away with there. And Dragon Riders of Pern specifically had a lot of gay male characters. It wasn't always handled in the most sensitive way, but they definitely existed and were mentioned, and it was canonical. So it was a way for me to perform queerness, but without having the risks in my real life. Like, realistically, a lot of it was just lesbian roleplay with extra steps when you break it down. And I do think that there are a lot of monogamous women who are heterosexual, who are exploring these other feelings that they have with other women in these spaces where there is a safe level of detachment for them to do so. And like I said, I do think an element of it is dissociation, and I think another element of it is trying to get our needs filled. Like, even if it isn't in real life, like, a lot of our brain reacts very similar to fictional stories as it does to real life stories. That's why films and stuff like that can have such a powerful impact on us. So there was a way that I was getting the catharsis, that I was getting a lot of the things that I needed in that kind of roundabout fashion. I just didn't get it, like, in my real life, and it was kind of a coping mechanism that was allowing me to continue to be in heteropassing relationships, basically, without going insane. I think without that outlet, I would have probably lost my mind. I want to talk about survival denial, because I think this is going to come into play in a lot of our discussions. Like, I think a lot of us realize at a very, very young age, like before we're consciously aware of it, that we have some element of feelings for people of the same gender. And I think, like, a lot of us, like, maybe we stared too long at, like, you know, our friend's older sister when we were like 2, or maybe it was a situation where we always wanted to play the guy when we were playing house as kids. But, like, these things happen, and the adults around us, I think, recognize, ooh, that looks a little gay. We're gonna put a stop to that. And, like, my parents never cared, but it definitely was an attitude in some of the neighbors that we had, some of my extended family. And I very distinctly remember a couple of times when I was like a little kid, and I think it was like one of the first times that I was changing with an adult, and it was like one of my aunts or something like that. And I, like, stared at her because I'd never really, like, you know, ever since I got done boob feeding, I had not seen a boob. You know, there was a level of interest, and I distinctly remember getting told that that was wrong and bad, and I was dirty for that. And even at that time, like, I don't even think at that point that I had any, like, sexual interest. I don't think I was looking because I was interested like that. I think I was looking because I was like 2 or 3, and it was a different body than mine, and thus I was curious about it. But these things set this belief in my head very early on that anything that even resembled staring too long, staring at the wrong places, like, for many years, even if I went to a dollar strip club, I was looking all the girls in the eye. And I think on some level, like, my brain knew, like, hey, if we let ourselves go, we're gonna let ourselves go Hawaii. And I think a lot of us remain deeply in denial about our identity and our sexuality until we get what we think our dream is. Like, I would get into a long-term serious relationship with a guy who, you know, I should be happy to be in a long-term serious relationship with, and then what I would inevitably find is that I was never more miserable. I did not want to be around that man all the time, and then it was always okay, how do I stay in this relationship enough, but, like, not have to have a man touching me all the time? Because I felt like I was putting on an act. I felt like I had to act feminine. I felt like I was terrified of getting caught watching the adult videos that I like, because I was terrified of them reading too much of my writing or coming in while I was writing some of that stuff. So there was always this elevated level of anxiety because I was keeping a secret all the time, you know? And I think because we have this socialized expectation of what a lesbian looks like or what a bisexual looks like, And because so many people don't actually resemble that, you have a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm not a lesbian, I just haven't found the right man yet. I'm not a lesbian, I'm just not healed enough to be in a successful relationship yet. But I do think on some subconscious level, you know who you are. Like for me, I was always wishing that I was a lesbian and stuff like that. And first, I thought it was just, I wish I was a lesbian so I didn't have to deal with men's bullshit. No, I wish I would just let myself be the person I am. And like, I am what I would consider a very obvious lesbian if you actually talk to me. I rant and rave and gush about women. I love women. Women are incredible. They're beautiful. They're intelligent. They're talented. They're capable. They have to balance all of these things at the same time. And because of that, every single minute of my life, especially when I was discussing women, like I had mostly guy friends and I talked about mostly guys and guy things, so it would not be obvious, but I was also in doing that depriving myself of such a big part of what I needed to be happy. And the men that I chose to hang out with were men that were in the IT career field. A lot of them were like Discord mod, like that kind of incel type nerd, and there was a level of like just hiding that I had to do to be safe in those environments. And like I said, I think on some subconscious level, like you know, and for me, like I subconsciously participated in bearding. Like I found relationships with people, you know, and I met people online, so it was easier for me to ignore the fact that they were a guy. Like a lot of my relationships were long distance, so I didn't have to put on the act all the time. I just had to do it 1 week a month when I was visiting him. And looking back, I realized that I didn't feel like attraction in a conventional way. I just had like a series of strategies that I used to try and find the right guy. Often I identified the man who had like most social capital or most scary boyfriend privilege. Like I wanted somebody who my association with them would prevent me from having to deal with crap. I didn't want people to bother me. If I was gonna have to date a man, I wanted to be left the frick alone. But like more in the like intellectual sense than the scary muscle sense, because I'm not really into muscle dudes. Muscle girls, oh, muscle dudes, nah. And often this strategy was used in tandem with dating people who other people in my life said would be a good fit for me. Unfortunately, like one of the first people who told me the type of man that I should be in a relationship was the man who groomed me. And he told me that I needed a man that was a good bit older than me. And he told me that I needed a man who had a great amount of darkness inside him, because I had a lot of darkness inside me, and only somebody darker would ever be able to see my light. These things made me chase men that were abusers. These things made me chase men who were going to hurt me. These things are the seeds that are planted by these harmful figures, often very early in our lives, that do not get countered until many years later, when we actually stop and think like, why do I date older men? Why do I think I need to date older men? Why do I think I need to date men that are dark and broken and need fixing? And when I looked into why I believed those things, I found at the heart of them my groomer. Finally, another strategy was to date men that didn't really seem to be that interested in sex. You know, that man who never really pursues a woman or anything like that. He swears that he's straight, he's just busy, he's focused on his job, whatever. A lot of times I focused on men like that, because a lot of times I would find a man who was at least a little bi, at least who would tolerate a little bit of my queerness, or maybe a guy who was okay with an open relationship or swinging or something of those natures. A lot of times they had like one or more traditionally feminine traits, so it was easily for me to ignore things, like they had long hair or a bubble butt or something along those lines. And they were very often extremely domestic. They had lived on their own. They could cook and clean for themselves. They weren't a man that needed a mommy. It's not like that for women. Sure, for many years I didn't really feel attraction, or I didn't understand what I felt as attraction, because I had been taught to suppress it all down. But once I unpackaged all that, holy crap, I realized that a significant way they keep queer women dating men is by keeping us from realizing what we feel for women is attraction. Because once we realize that, it's like, no, I wasn't actually interested in dudes. It's like, once you really let go and let yourself be attracted to women, it's like, there's nothing in guys that's here for me, you know? For me, taking away all of these negative beliefs I had that were forcing me to suppress my attraction to women was like going up to a rusty faucet and whacking it with a sledgehammer. So for the first time in years, the water can come free. it was a time, and it was something that really made me realize, oh wow, we have not been in it to win it with these men for the whole time. Not at all. I'm gonna be doing an entire video on bearding, but let's discuss that a little bit, because I think that's the next natural progression from where we're at. I want to give people time to ask some questions. I want to give people time to give some perspective, because I think there are a lot of people that are technically bearding that don't necessarily realize they're bearding. And I think once I make them like jog their memory and make them, oh wait, this is actually bearding, I want to talk about that. Is bearding real? Do people actually do it in 2024 when you can legally get married? Absolutely. Absolutely, I did it for many years. And there's a number of reasons people do it. Either they don't want to leave the faith structure that they're a part of because they'd have to lose their entire family, or they have to lose their entire family independent of their faith structure, or they're in a career field where they're already at a disadvantage for their gender and they don't want a second disadvantage because they're also gay. But also there are just so many factors at place that prevent women from like understanding what they want and need in relationships, and they just wholesale believe anybody that tells them they cannot be happy if they are with another woman. Now, the Wikipedia definition for beard is a slang term describing a person who is used knowingly or unknowingly as a date, romantic partner, or spouse, either to conceal infidelity or to conceal one's sexual orientation. And then there's also what I call bearding in essence, which is basically participating in any behavior that seems to outsiders as cis heteronormative or monogamous when your relationship often on the inside is anything but. And you're usually doing these relationships to preserve your family harmony, your religious convictions, or your career. So I think it's pretty common, especially in men, if you're asexual or aromantic, to participate in a relationship just because it seems normal, because other people will view you as more normal if you were in a relationship. I've also done a number of relationships with men who were bi, but who were desperate not to be outed because of their career, because of their faith convictions, or because of their families. And I do think if you're in a relationship that seems monogamous from the outside and you're swinging, or you're doing ethical non-monogamy, or if you're doing any of these things, you are still participating in a form of bearding. And I think like traditionally back in the like 50s or whatever, people would have considered like fronting is straight and then swinging on the back end as a form of bearding, especially if the swinging involved any type of homosexual activity. And I think when you open the definition to include that, you suddenly have a lot more people that are like, oh, wait a minute, actually I am in a bearding relationships. Because I know, like, especially like I said, a lot of men who are bisexual who want to have relationships with men but do not want to have the career impact from it, and who get in a relationship with a woman who is often bisexual and is often a relationship that is open to some degree, or they swing together, or they have some amount of prearranged, this is what we're going to do to make other people think that we're monogamous, and on the back end we're going to go to the clubs and we're going to get freaky. And I think, like I said, when you open it up to include that, people realize just how many people are actually bearding nowadays. Because I was non-monogamous for a number of my relationships, and as soon as I outed myself to a lot of my friends as being non-monogamous, I suddenly realized just how many of my friends' monogamous marriages were anything but. Like, I do believe, especially amongst people where both partners have the financial capability to exist independent of each other, that there is a fuck ton of ethical non-monogamy going on, and a lot of non-ethical non-monogamy going on too, but we're not going to touch on that here. Like I said, I am going to do a bigger video on bearding, but I do think it's one of those things that while we may joke that it's over and done with, it's anything but, especially amongst rich people. Queer joy. So this was tacked on at the end, and I really apologize if it feels that way, because it's one of the most important concepts to me. I've been listening to a lot of Julian Baker podcasts, and Julian has really been great for me at understanding why queer joy is such an important part of my life. For many years, I thought that it wasn't that important for me to come out, and it wasn't that important for me to act gay. Like, even when I was bisexual, there was an element of hiding it. I very rarely, actually went into the world and existed as a publicly presenting bisexual person. I never went to Pride or anything like that. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I had this philosophy that I didn't want to be one of those gays. I didn't want to be one of those gays who had, lost complete contact with, cis heteronormativity. And for so many years, I deprived myself of so many meaningful experiences, connections, everything. Because now I realize that so much of that I have been taught to believe is not important, so that I will not seek it out. Because it is so critically important to be surrounded by people like you, you, who affirm your identity, who validate your experiences, and who love you for all of that, and who respect you for all of that, and who understand the things that you have gone through, and who will give you that perspective when you're losing perspective. Many homophobic people and religious groups believe that the only way you can experience joy is to be in communion with God, and they believe that queer people cannot be in communion with God, and therefore that we all have to be hateful and miserable all the time. Being joyful, living in that joy, embracing that joy, and learning how to love ourselves because we're queer, loving the parts of our queer identity and the queer individuals in our lives and the way that impacts our lives, instead of viewing it as something to be hated and feared and resented and misunderstood, which is what so many of us get taught at the very earliest points in our lives. We are told when we are toddlers crawling around at the foot of a pulpit that we are ugly, we are undeserving of love, that we will go to hell, that we will burn forever. That has such a negative impact on so many of our self-images, and a lot of us don't even realize that. They spend so much time trying to divorce us from queer joy because they know it is one of the most powerful things behind us. They know that if we love ourselves, that if we're joyful in our identities, if we support ourselves and each other, we are going to be more of a threat to cis heteronormativity than if we are just in our bedrooms alone, hating ourselves and viewing ourselves as flawed. I think 2020 was a big reminder to a lot of us just how important it is to go out, to participate in queer culture, to spend time with other queer people, to do these things that we may not necessarily be able to do in our day-to-day, everyday lives, especially if we're not in affirming spaces living with affirming people yet. And something that I say a lot is it is a massive fallacy to just reduce queerness down to sex and sexuality, right? Because queerness is a whole culture of art, fashion, design, history, philosophy. There are so many things that are inherent to queerness that are so beautiful and so important to celebrate, and the source of our power and our freedom for so many of us. And not just for queer people as a whole. Like, for many years, I thought I was doing okay because I had a lot of gay guy friends. But unfortunately, a lot of those gay guy friends were toxically misogynist gay guy friends who only accepted me if I acted like one of the dudes, and who did not give the level of compassion and just emotional embracement that lesbians do. Lesbians are so good at embracing people and just making them feel part of the greater culture. And joining the part of the culture that you are part of, meeting people that have lives that are similar to yours and that have that kind of experience that they can share, that they can validate, that you can kind of vibe off of each other. It is so critical. Realizing I was a lesbian and making more lesbian friends is one of the most crucial decisions I've made recently, because it was so key in me really understanding and learning to love myself, and realizing just how many things that I thought I was alone in, experiences that I thought I was the only one that had been through them, were experiences that a lot of lesbians went through. And I got a lot of support that I wasn't expecting. Talking to other lesbians who had grown up in spaces where there was a very restrictive religious mindset and there was a lot of restrictions specifically on our queerness, it was so important for me. I love myself in a way that I've never loved myself before. I'm not getting distracted by all of these flaws. I'm not making excuses not to love myself. I'm not telling myself that I will love myself when I achieve this one thing or do this thing. I am just loving myself for who I am authentically, because I am living that authentic self. So much of my childhood was spent in spaces that actively suppressed who I was and what I believed in and what I felt was important. And that actively suppressed so many things that were expressions of my true authentic self. Sex and sexuality are not sins. They are not smudges on our otherwise flawless being. Our sex and our sexuality is part of what makes us human, part of something that we should embrace as part of the intrinsic human experience. It makes us human, it contributes to our happiness, and it is a key part of our human existence that too many of us have put off for so long. We have been taught to shame and fear and avoid it, when it is beautiful. The reason I hated myself for so many years is because it was a facade. It was not who I actually am. It was a list of coping skills and defense mechanisms that were designed to convince other people that I belonged and that I was not a threat and that I should just be overlooked and ignored. But I can't be overlooked and ignored. Everyone needs love and attention. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning. Accepting and embracing my true sapphic self has resulted in me really learning how to see my own light and beauty. I'm not hideously ugly. I'm not undeserving of love. the people who matter see me and love me, and that makes all the difference.